Hey, this is Joe from Personas. Got this question from Arthur. Says, I've watched a few videos on the new Studio One panning options, but I'm still left unschooled. The videos show what the options are and sort of what they do, but don't explain why and where to best use them. Great question, Arthur. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So if you're not familiar with I can't keep track. I think it was with version 6.0, we introduced these new panning options. So if you are in a mix, let's say this stereo electric guitar bus. So it's specifically for stereo channels. If I double click on this, it now expands out so I can see it a little more clearly and adjust it. But there's a drop down here for 3 different modes, and that's what Arthur is talking about. Fun fact, if you've been using Studio One for a long time like I have, these modes might look familiar if you've spent any time using the Binaural Pan plugin. So this is just a very simple tool that allows us to sum things to mono very quickly and to adjust the overall width of the stereo spread of a given track, and then to also pan that. So this is a tool, if you've watched some of my older mixing videos, I've been using Binaural Pan for years, primarily for the most part as just a mono button, to take something that's stereo that I want to pan hard left and I don't want it to be stereo at all. I'll come in and apply this to the channel, and then I'll do my panning. So let's real quickly, let me remove this, and I'll show you kind of how things work in the situations where I would use something other than the default mode, which for me is the balance mode. So let's go back to this electric guitar bus, and let's expand this out. And let's first talk about the balance mode. So this is the default mode. And right now, if we listen to this, I should have a couple of electric guitars feeding this bus. Okay, so we've got our 2 guitars. Let me go right here. Start at bar 21. Okay, so there's one that's panned hard left, it's this one, and one is panned hard right, which is this one. So if we were to, mute one of them, okay, they're coming out hard left and hard right. So what happens when I do some panning on the bus to which those guitars are sent? So let's say the example here, I'm going to use just these 2 guitars, but think about it in terms of maybe you have a bunch of background vocals or a bunch of string parts or a bunch of keyboard parts or synths or any number of things that have a big stereo field. When you want to start panning and placing those things or adjusting the width, you can do all that from a single bus, and these tools give you a few more options and flexibility to do that. So in the normal mode, which is balance mode, if we double click, if we pan this hard left, what happens? Now, this is a question that you can guess as to what happens, but you actually have to just try it out for yourself, because every system's going to have slightly different ways that it handles panning, but it's easy enough to test, okay? We've got 2 guitars, one going hard right, one going hard left. So if I pan to the left, if the options are I'm only going to hear what's in the left channel, or I'm going to hear both combined together and pan to the left. Those are kind of our 2 options. How do we know which one that it does? Well, let's just try it and see. So that sounds to me like it's just one guitar. I'm only hearing the left guitar. Let's test that theory by clicking the solo button on the left guitar and muting it essentially, and see if we hear anything else. Okay, so this is an easy way for you to test this for yourself if you forget, which we all do from time to time. Just pan something hard left, hard right to a bus with a stereo bus, and then just pan it to the left and take away one of the left or the rights and see what happens. So now we know if we go hard left with the balance mode engaged, we're just listening to the left channel, and then hard right, we're just listening to the right channel. Now, why? You may think, well, how is that useful? Why would I want to do that? Well, this is really helpful for a specific situation. I don't touch the stereo panners a lot, especially on my main buses. But this would be an example if I got a recording of a piano, and it's a stereo track, and it's the way they recorded it, the left hand, the low notes, is much louder than the right. And I really want to, what's the word here, balance between those 2. This would allow me to do that. So let's say, for example, this isn't true here, but let's say this left guitar is way louder than the right. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that all we have is a stereo file here. Well, we could try to split them out to 2 different channels if we want and do all of that, or we can just use this panner to balance between them. So let's listen to that. Okay, the left one's too loud, so what do? Let's just move it over to the right so that they become more balanced together. That problem is solved. So this is more of a problem-solving tool. The piano example is probably the most common use case I can think of myself using, where it's a stereo file, the left hand is really heavy, the right hand is really light. I can just shift the balance so the left hand gets turned down a little bit so that the bass notes and the other notes feel more balanced together. This doesn't require any fancy tools, any weird like stereo, mid-side compression, none of that. Just balance it with the balance tool. Now, what are these other options? The other two are dual, okay, and then binaural. Now, these are almost identical, which can cause some confusion. So dual is really interesting. So if I command click, by the way, here's just a fun fact. If you command click on a setting in Studio One, it will, a lot of them, things like faders and panners, will jump back to its default state. So this was, when I just clicked this over, you could see it was all like way over here and looking wonky. I just command clicked on it and it went back to the default. That's option click on a PC. Same with this fader. I can command click to get it to go back to 0 dB or whatever. All right, so let's get this back. This is the dual mode. And what this allows us to do is we can adjust the left panner or the right panner independently. So let's say now I'm a big fan of panning things hard left and hard right. Let's say for whatever reason it's too wide. Maybe it's a stereo overhead and it's almost too wide, it's distracting, I want to bring it in a little bit. I can do that a couple of different ways. First way is to simply just bring the left side in some, bring the right side in some. So I have to click on the very end and I can bring the right and the left independently. So now we have a narrower, that's a hard word to say. It's kind of like saying the word rural. Now we have a narrower sounding guitar part. Okay, when I clicked it back out, it went much wider. So I don't use this a ton, but if I had something that needed to be narrowed for whatever reason, maybe it's background vocals and they need to come in a little bit because they feel like they're way out there and not really a part of the mix, this is how you could do it. But there's an easier way. You see this percentage sign. If you just click on that, we can say 50, and it'll just bring everything in to 50%. So the clicking and dragging thing I would rarely do unless I'm trying to make really fine adjustments. I just set the width here. What's interesting about the dual mode is now that I've got it at 50%, if I click anywhere in the middle, I can adjust. The width stays the same, but the placement changes. So maybe I want to have doubled guitars, but instead of left and right, I want it to really be left and middle. Well, this allows me to do that from this panner without touching the individual channels, so it sounds like this. So specific use cases, in this example, we could just pan the individual guitars. There's no reason to do this. But again, this is for if you have a huge mess of tracks or a big stereo file that you can't really control. This allows you to change the placement of things. So you click on the very end to change the left or the right. Then you click in the middle to adjust that entire like chunk without changing the relative width of each. And if you ever get lost, just command click, everything goes back to its default state. So that's the dual mode. One of the things you can also do, if you just press 0, now it becomes mono. So now both of them are panned right up the middle, and then if we click and drag, see, we can click and drag each side, but if we just want it mono up the middle, which some cases might be the case, we press 0, now we've got it up the middle, both guitars. Okay. Now, this is where, if I needed to mono them and then pan them, this is where the binaural comes into play. So if we set it up as the default setting, binaural is set like this. So 100% refers to the width, and then this is the panning. So if we pan this to the left, what happens? Okay, it behaves exactly like the first one we talked about, the balance pan. But if we keep it in the middle, we can now do this, which allows us to adjust the overall width with a single knob, which can sometimes be cool. And the big thing that binaural lets us do is it lets us go up in width. I'll talk about that in just a second. If we want to go mono like this, Now that it's mono, we can pan it to the left, and now both guitars will be to the left. See how both turned up the overall volume? So if you've got a bunch of things, I'll do this with like, if I stereo mic an acoustic guitar in this recording session and I really want it panned hard left, I don't want any width, I just want both microphones panned hard left, but it's a stereo track, this is what I would use for that. I would open up the panner, I would click this, pull this down to 0, and then I would pan it. So now it's a mono channel that I'm just panning left and right. That's the main use case that I use binaural for. The other is interesting. You can actually take the width higher than 100%. It can go as high as 200%. Now, I'm not entirely sure how it does it, but it uses like phasey processing to create the almost like the illusion of extra width. Be careful with this, because if you use this too much, it can start to make things sound out of phase, but a little bit can be interesting. I'll use this occasionally in mastering, or if I've got like a stereo synth sound that's pretty mono and I really want it to spread out more without using reverb and things like that, I'll crank up this binaural pan widening tool upwards. And this is just built right in. Again, this is a tool that came from that binaural pan plugin that I showed you, but now it's just built in on the channel. So I can increase this. Listen to what happens to those guitars as I go up all the way to 200. It's fairly subtle on 2 guitars, but it definitely thinned them out and made them a little wider. We could even do that on our entire drum mix bus. Actually, no, there is no panner on the mix bus. We would have to use the binaural pan plugin there, and we could kind of take the whole mix and widen it out a little bit. Use that one carefully. It's one of those things, if you use it all the way, 200% all the time, you will ruin everything. So just be cautious. Use it occasionally, see what it does, but don't go nuts with it. So Arthur, I hope that answered your question and gave you some ideas of ways to use this. It's not really here's how you get this sound with this particular setting. It's more, there's a whole host of reasons why you might want to adjust the panning more than you were able to do before we gave you these options. So now you just have more tools to really get that panning exactly how you want it. All right, that's it for me for today. Thanks for watching. See ya.